Hello fellow wargamers, how are you today? Welcome to my channel, and I hope everyone is doing well. Very warm here today, so thankfully finally the warm weather is coming to our area. Just 2 weeks ago we had sleet and snow, and wow, what a difference. Anyway folks, so a lot of work going on here in this studio today, and I figured I'd make a short video on a game that Julie and I want to play, and we hope to have a couple of battle reports on. This is the game called Uncharted Seas. Now, Uncharted Seas was designed by Spartan Games, who unfortunately is no longer around. They shut down in like 2017, and they designed a couple of games, Uncharted Seas. They also did Dystopian Wars, which is more of a steampunk game with Navy ships and aircraft and airships and all kinds of stuff. And then they had also Halo. They were designing some of the Halo models for a Halo game. But they went out, and so did Uncharted Seas, among all the other things. And just very briefly go over the game, then I'm going to show you a project that I have, an ongoing project, and I'm going to make some ships myself from scratch in order to play the game. Fill in the gaps, because there are some of the factions that I really wanted to get that I never was able to purchase. So a little bit about the game. The game is interesting. It has some fluff, right? Very brief. It tells you a little bit about the setting, you know, what it's like. And one of the interesting things is that all the factions in Uncharted Seas are your typical fantasy tropes. So elves, humans, dwarves, orcs, and their navies, essentially. One of the interesting things, it's set in a time where they combine sort of Age of Sail with Ironclads, sort of that, it's kind of that mix. And I found that interesting. Of course, the dwarves, as always, for some reason, dwarves are always the metalsmiths, and so they're the ones with the ironclad type ships. I would like to experiment with that a little further, and maybe in the future design some ships that are human, also in the sort of steam ironclad era. I've always loved those ships, that transition point in the real world, you know, between Age of Sail and steam. There's some really interesting vessels from the past. But anyway, getting back to Uncharted Seas, you have dragons and sea monsters and other things that some of the factions can use to their favor. One particular faction here, and I don't have their all their names, but they actually have ships that house dragons in like special cargo holes on the ship, and then they just unleash them. So it's almost like an aircraft carrier, has all these dragons and unleashes them onto enemy ships. So that's kind of cool. And I believe the elves here in this game also control dragons as well. So as far as the worlds, there are a couple. It has a really nice map, and then you have Principia, Northern Principia, and Southern Principia, which seem to be like the primary landmass. And then you have a couple of other larger landmasses, and then everything else seems to be like archipelagos and islands. There's quite a few landmasses here. So interesting map. I've always enjoyed games that have maps. You know, maps are cool. Now, the game is played in phases. You have battle groups, which consist of a large battleship, so a capital ship, right? Or flagship, rather. A battleship, 3 cruisers, which are also part of your capital ships, and then frigates. And frigates, you usually get 6. That's a typical sort of battle group starter. So you have 13 cards that are faction specific, and then you have 13 general cards that are spread throughout all of the factions, right? So they're more like general cards that every player gets. So that gives a little bit of variety to the game, and the cards have all kinds of events and things that go on that will, of course, affect your game. So before the initiative phase, you have basically a card phase, which is when you play your cards. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, of course, includes initiative, and then you have wind checks. Now, this is interesting because, of course, this game, there's a lot of sailing vessels, so a lot of things are affected by wind. So every turn, a player, whoever won initiative, is going to also roll the wind turn. And it's a special rule, special phase right after the initiative phase. Now, the wind is either going to benefit a player or slow a player down. Depending on how your ship is angled to the wind, it's going to affect your movement. So I always found that interesting. I like it when they incorporate wind or current effects into a game like this, right? So then you have, if there are any sea monsters on the board, and this is sort of an optional thing, if there are any sea monsters, players can test to see whether sea monsters pop up and how they could be used. So that's interesting. You know, sea monsters, always cool. Giant krakens or serpents, good stuff. So initiative and activation, that's activation, of course, comes next. And by activations, you usually activate a squadron. So a squadron would be, for example, 3 heavy cruisers make 1 squadron, or 6 frigates make 1 squadron, or 1 battleship, right? So either you move your battleship, or you move your 3 cruisers, or you move your squadron of frigates. So that's cool, and it's alternate activation. Movement phase, of course, that's a huge phase, and that's during the activation. You have movement, you have combat. These are like sub phases in the activation phase, right? So movement's interesting because you use templates, and there are different size templates, 3 different templates for the 3 different ship classes. So frigate, cruiser, and battleship. And so large, medium, small. And these templates you use to maneuver your ships. You also use those templates to check your broadsides, because ships will have different broadside angles and things like that. So very cool. You can, and depending on the arc where your enemy is, that will determine how many dice you have. And of course, broadsides are the strongest type of attack that your ship can do, especially battleships. They have so many guns. And then you have a critical hit table. Of course, ships take damage. They take hull point damage. And then there are some times where the ship takes a critical hit. The other interesting thing, there's a lot of ramming in this game. There's some factions that really use that kind of attack. Most of the time that attack is something you don't like necessarily want to do, because it will damage your own ship, but there are some factions that are specialized for that, right? And one interesting thing is submarines. There are submarines in this game, and they're built by dwarves, and basically these submarines are designed to ram your ships and make big holes in them. So they don't shoot torpedoes or anything. They're basically, the whole submarine is a weapon. So that's interesting. And so you have like ram ratings and special rules like this that tell you when and how you ram other ships and what kind of damages they do and everything like that. There are boarding actions, and that's one thing I liked about Uncharted Seas, and we use little tokens to represent our guys. But boarding actions are important, especially when smaller ships are trying to attack larger ships. It's not a very complicated game. Once you start playing, you realize, like, wow, the rules are pretty fast. They go quickly once you learn them. But at the same time, there's a lot of nice little detail as well. Okay. And then, of course, you have sample scenarios, so that's always good. And then you have a faction section. It gives you all the primary faction, like the Imperial Navy, the York Raiders, the Dwarves, the Elves. You have the Iron Dwarves, which build all of the Ironclad ships. And then you have the Shroud Mages, which are more the magic-y Arcanist Dwarves. So you have a lot of different factions, and the factions are interesting. So I'm going to show you the project that I have going on for this game. Okay, so this is an Ironclad ship that I'm building, and it's next to one of the battleships from the human faction. So I'm going to put that aside. And it's in pieces still because I haven't finished. And so this is done with recycled foam, and this was a meat tray that I used, cut up. And I also use this kind of thick foam. It's pretty dense. It's not really good for carving because it still crumbles. But I learned how to file this thing going with the grain. And what I do is I use it as a filler. And then I add my cardboard, hard card, and I paint all this, even the bottom. And then I added some cardboard along the side. And those will probably be the armor plating. I'm going to add some rivets and stuff. And then here is the structure that sits on top. Now, I drilled some holes in there. That's going to be where all the guns are. And it has quite a few guns. A couple of straws, and I cut them up to give it that sort of steampunkish, right, Victorian kind of look. And then it'll go like this. And I'm thinking about adding wheelhouses, which I think would make it interesting. It would be different, right? And so there is the wheelhouse, and I would have to decorate all that. So I don't know. You guys, what do you think? Do you think the wheelhouses really look good on it, or do you think not? I think they do, but I'm still kind of debating. I would carve them up, add some detail, and there's still a lot of detail that I want to add on the ship. And then this would be like a battleship. You know, definitely an interesting ship for any fleet. And I'm thinking this is going to be the Iron Dwarves. That'll be for that faction. And I will stick to the different size classes of the ships and make them as close as possible to the different size classes so I can use the rules that way. So, alright, so that's all I wanted to show you guys. I hope you have enjoyed this brief update. And Uncharted Seas, as soon as Julie and I go over the rules, we're going to set up a battle report for that game. So, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it.